ChatGPT is all the rage right now, and I need more views. So in this tutorial we will learn how to build a little full stack application using NextJS and OpenAI's GPT-3 API. So we build our very own little AI application, and we will create this little cringy motivational quote generator. This is just a funny idea I had, but you can build anything you want. GPT-3 is an AI that generates text for you. What kind of text it generates depends on your prompt. It can give you answers to questions, you can create chatbots that act like real humans, you can even let it write whole articles or books. This is just one example use case. So in this app we can type in a prompt into this text field here, and the AI will generate a cringy, embarrassing, motivational quote that just makes you want to peel your skin off. And we can enter any prompt here. So let's say we want a motivational quote about, I don't know, about code, for example. Then we type it in here, we click this button, and as soon as we click it, we make an API request to OpenAI's GPT-3 API. So this takes like half a second or a second, and then we get our generated text back. So this text is generated by AI. Code never sleeps, it just keeps coding until it gets to its goal. So this is a really cringy motivational quote. Let's try another one. Let's try, I don't know, tomatoes. Let's see what it comes up with. You can't make sauce without making mistakes. So tomatoes, up and give it your best shot. Well, I guess counts as a motivational quote. Let's try money. Money doesn't buy you happiness, but it can buy you success. Well, I guess. So this is a fun little project we will be building here that you can use to learn how a GPT-3 works. And you will be surprised by how easy and fast we can build a little full stack application with Next.js. And at the end, I will even show you how we can deploy everything to Vercel, which is very easy as well. Next.js is a framework on top of React. So we write React components, but it has some optimization features, and importantly for our project, it even has a full backend built in. So in a normal React app, you only have the front end and you have to build a separate backend, like we did in my React MERN beginner tutorial, where we built a full Express server. Knowing how to build such an Express server is a very useful skill to have, and for many situations you need such a full-blown server. But for certain projects, especially these small and quick ones, we can use Next.js's inbuilt API routes. Next.js API routes are so-called serverless functions. So they are not a full-blown server that we can turn on and that has state and then that keeps running. Instead, those are just functions that we can execute and then they are over, and there is no server that keeps running in the background that we have to maintain. What you need depends on your project. Sometimes you need a fully blown server, sometimes these API functions are enough. In our case, since what we do is so simple, these functions are enough and we can make our request to the OpenAI API. Now we will jump right into the code in a moment, but before that I want to make a little announcement because I'm currently working on a fully blown Next.js course that goes far beyond what we are doing here. So this is a small and quick project here. In that other course I'm planning to build a fully blown blog software with user accounts, with comments, with a markdown editor to write blog posts. So this will be a big full stack project that you can put on your portfolio and that I think will teach you really a lot about Next.js development and all its important features, but also about Express server development, because in this other project we will not use API routes, we will instead build a fully blown Express server. So I'm putting a lot of effort into this other course. It will be a paid course. It's not ready yet, but I'm setting up an email list if you want to get notified when the course is ready. Because when the course launches, I will also have a coupon code available with a discount, but not for long. And by signing up to my email list, you make sure that you will get notified as soon as the course is out. I'm also planning to send some update emails about the progress on the course. Maybe I will also run some polls to get some input from you on what exactly you want to see in this course. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, you can sign up to this email list under codinginflow.com/nextjs. This is where you can sign up for the email list. And as soon as the course is ready, I will replace this URL for the course itself. So go to codinginflow.com/nextjs and either you will find the email list there, or when the course is ready, the course itself. And of course, I will also put a link to this URL in the video description below. And now let's get to our project here and start building this. The best way to set up a new Next.js project is by using this create next app command. And for this we need Node.js installed. So if you haven't yet, go to nodejs.org and install the latest long-term version here. Just follow the installation instructions. And of course we also need a code editor. And I'm going to use VS Code here, which you can download for free and install under this URL. You can also use a different one. It's up to you. And if you want to learn all the basics about this and the basics about React, then you can watch my full Learn course here on YouTube, where we install all this stuff. But if you just want to follow along and build this project with me, then you should be fine as long as you have Node and a code editor installed. And then we want to copy this command here. Okay, and then we go to the folder on our PC where we want to save this project. Where you save this is completely up to you. And here we want to open the command line. On Windows, we can do this by holding Shift down and right-clicking, and then open the PowerShell here. I don't know right now how it works on Linux and Mac, but if you don't know, then you can easily Google that. Alright, and here we copy this command. npx create next app add latest. Then we have to give our project a name. I'm gonna call this Next.js GPT-3. You can also give it a different name. Would you like to use TypeScript with this project? Absolutely yes, because building real projects in pure JavaScript is very difficult in my opinion, because it's missing the strong type system and TypeScript is just superior. So yes, we always want to use TypeScript. Would you like to use ESLint? Absolutely yes. ESLint is what shows us warnings and some errors in our code that we wouldn't see otherwise. Would you like to use the source directory with this project? This means that it puts our files into this src folder, which we usually do in Express as well and also in normal React projects. But in Next.js this is not really necessary, it's up to your taste. The default selection is no, so I will stick with no. And we also don't want to use the experimental app directory. This is a change they've done recently, but it's still experimental. And as you can see, the default selection is still no, so I stick with no here as well. Then it creates our project, so we have to wait a few seconds. And when this is finished, we want to cd into the project folder, which has the name we just gave this project up here when we set this up. So in my case, this was Next.js minus GPT-3, and we can auto-complete this with tab. So we cd into this folder, and we open this project with this command, code space, and then a point or a period. To open this in VS Code, can close the command line and it should open VS Code with this project. If you use a different code editor, open this folder in there. So this has set up a new Next.js project for us with some files that we need, like the good old package.json with all the packages in here. A git ignore file where all the important stuff is already in. We have this pages folder where we have some example pages. And this API folder are our server functions, where we can later build our little backend without having to create a separate server. The next thing we need is an OpenAI account. Now using GPT-3 is a paid service, but you get some free credit when you sign up, so you can try this out, play around with it, and you can use it for quite a while actually. So you want to go to openai.com/API, and here you want to sign up for an account. I already have an account, so I skip this, but just sign up and follow all the instructions. After you have signed up for an account, you can play around with GPT a bit on this playground here. Now this is not quite the same as ChatGPT. This is GPT-3, which is basically the model that ChatGPT is based on. So I think ChatGPT is just GPT-3 with certain configuration to make it optimized for like person-to-person chats. But ChatGPT can't be used with an API right now. Instead, we use GPT-3, but it does the same thing. It uses AI to generate text in response to a prompt you enter. But GPT-3 is much more flexible than the ChatGPT setup, because you can completely engineer the prompt as you want to get different results. As you can see, we also have these different settings here. This changes how creative the response is, for example, or how repetitive it is allowed to be. So you can really do a lot with it, and this playground is a nice way to get used to how this works. Just be aware that using this playground also counts towards your free credit that you have. So it will use up that free credit. But it won't cost you any money until you actually entered some billing info into your account. Alright, so you can play around with this a bit. There are different presettings that you can choose. For example, Q&A. and it has already set up some text, because having text as example for GPT-3 basically shows it how it should respond. But you don't have to enter such an elaborate text. We can also do something like this. Tell me a joke about potatoes. And then let's increase the temperature here, because this is basically the creativity, and a joke is a creative process. And we will enter similar settings later in our code when we use the API instead of this here, and increase the max length a bit, disable this stuff. But you can play around with this as you want, just to get a feeling of this. Tell me a joke about potatoes, put a period here, and then I click submit. And it looks like it had a problem with our prompt. I think this is because this part here, we want to get rid of this and try it again. Why did the potato cross the road to get to the mesh term? Whatever this means, but you can see how easy this is to use. So this text is generated by AI. And there are also different models available, but DaVinci is the best one of them all. It creates the best results. All right, but of course we want to use this through our server to use it on our website. We don't just want to play around with this background here, and this is what the API is for. So we can click on View API Keys and create a new secret key here. Of course, you should not show this key anyone, but I'm gonna delete this after I've recorded this tutorial, so this is fine for me right now. And of course, OpenAI also has an elaborate documentation where you can read more about the different endpoints available, the different stuff you can do with GPT-3 and how the code has to be written. But you don't need to read this right now because I will show you everything. So let's go back into our VS Code project. And the first thing we want to do is we want to store this API key somewhere before we forget it. And of course, we don't want to push this to our repository because the API key should be private. And for this, we create an env file. So we right click somewhere here in this project, new file, and we call it .env.local. This env.local file is already included in the git ignore right here with this asterisk as a placeholder. This means it will not be pushed to GitHub by default. So this is a suitable place to put secrets like the API key. All right, so let's create an entry in here. OpenAI underscore API underscore key. You can give this any name you want, just have to use the same one later, and then we paste this. Just like this, there are no quotation marks necessary. And we save this. Then we also want to install some dependencies. So we open the command line, which in Germany I do with Ctrl Ö, but you probably don't have an Ö key on your keyboard. So we can also click on terminal and then on new terminal. And view should show you how you can open an existing terminal with this key combination here. This is an Ö, by the way. Okay, let's see which dependencies we have already installed in the package.json. Okay, these ones here. I want to install Bootstrap, which is a UI framework that just makes buttons and stuff like that look a bit better than the default HTML stuff. So we write npmi react minus bootstrap, which is a special Bootstrap version for React, and then a space and the default Bootstrap versions, because we need both. So we type in exactly like this and press enter to install this. Okay, nice. And then we need OpenAI's package, because they have a JS package as well, which we can use that makes these API requests easier. npmi OpenAI. And as usual, I want to mention that over time, these version numbers here change because they release updates. Sometimes these updates can break things. If you watch this tutorial like 2 years in the future and stuff doesn't work anymore, then as a fallback, you can always install the versions I'm using here, which you can do like this. You can type in npmi OpenAI like we just did, and then you can type in an add and then define the specific version you want to install. Like in this case, 3.1.0. This way you get the same version as I use here in case something isn't working anymore. Alright, and that's actually all the dependencies we need. Next we want to make some changes to the global CSS file we get in a new NextJS project by default. This is the only place where we are allowed to write global CSS. In all other places we have to use CSS modules, which are basically a way to scope CSS classes to a specific component. We also use this in my MERN tutorial, by the way. Just that in NextJS it's basically enforced automatically. So there's a lot of stuff here that comes by default, because by default there's already a little page set up when you run create next app. We can see how this looks by typing in npm run dev. So in React you usually have npm start to run the development server, but in Next.js this is called npm run dev. So after you have entered npm run dev, you can go to localhost 3000 and you see this Next.js example page here. Alright, but of course this is not what we want to keep in our app. First of all, we are going to replace the code in this global CSS because most of the stuff we don't need. So I'm going to remove this whole thing and paste what I've copied from my preparation project. It's not a lot of code. You can pause the video and type it out if you want. I will also put a link to the whole project into the video description below if you want to copy it from there, but it's not a lot, so you can just pause the video and type it out here. Actually, we can get rid of this line here as well. This was just a leftover. Then we save this with Ctrl S, and then we go into this home.module.css file, which is the CSS code for the front page we just saw a moment ago. And we will delete all the stuff here as well and type it out by hand later, because we have our own style. Okay, let's save this for now as well and go into the index.tsx file. The name of this file has to stay index.tsx because this lets Next.js know that this is the front page. So don't change this name to anything else. And in the Next.js course I'm preparing, where you can sign up for under codingandflow.com/nextjs, I will explain the structure of these pages folder and how all of this works in more detail. But this project we are building here is relatively simple, so you don't have to know all the nitty-gritty details. Okay, and we want to get rid of most of the stuff in here as well. For example, this interline, we don't need this. We want to keep the head because this contains metadata about our project. This is, for example, the title of the page. So let's change this right now to cringe AI. You can type in whatever you want. This is what we see, for example, as the title in the browser tab, or in Google for that matter. Create cringy motivational quotes. That's the title of the website. The description shows up, for example, on social media when you paste a link to your website. I'm going to set this to by coding in flow. You can enter whatever you want. And the cool thing about Next.js is that you can change this between different pages. Different pages can have different descriptions, different titles, and so on. And this is the fav icon here. We keep it as the default. I don't know what the viewport is. We just keep it as it is. Doesn't matter right now. And down here, we want to delete everything that's inside this main tag. So we keep main, but we delete this whole div because this is just this default front page we saw. But of course, we want to build our own page. Then we save this. And by the way, you can close the sidebar here by clicking on this button or Ctrl B. And then I just put the page on localhost and the code in split view so I can see the changes live that I'm making here. Okay, let's put some stuff on this page, and of course it won't look great yet because we haven't set up any CSS for this page yet, but we will take care of this later. Let's start with an h1, which is the title of this page. I'm gonna set this to cringe AI, and up there it is. Hello, cringe AI title. And as you can see, the UI changes are shown immediately as soon as we save the code, which is really cool. Let's also add an h3. Powered by GPT-3, and I'm going to set a div here with some text. Normally for text you want to use the paragraph tag, so this little p tag, but this has a margin at the bottom by default, which I don't want for our layout here, so I'm going to put the text into this div. Enter a topic and the AI will generate a super cringy motivational quote. This is just some explainer text we will have here. Now, before we forget it, let's put the CSS of Bootstrap in here, because it comes with some default styling. For example, it changes the default font. I think this is Arial, which is not very beautiful. For this, we want to go into this app.tsx folder here. This is where we put, for example, the global styling file, and here we also want to insert this line of code here. And I have this from the Bootstrap documentation, where they explain how to set this up. So now again, you can either pause the video and type it out by hand or copy it from my repository. But the import statement of this has to be at the very top, above our global CSS file. because whatever comes below will override the CSS of the one that is above. And we want our own CSS, of course, to always take precedence before Bootstrap CSS. So we put Bootstrap at the very first. And as you can see, it changes some stuff. Our background color is gone. We will take care of this in a moment. And the default font is more beautiful, in my opinion. This is the default font that Bootstrap uses. Okay, then we can close this. Alright, and then let's set up the rest of the HTML and apply the styling afterwards. I think we are just faster this way. So below this div, still inside the main, we want to put an image. That's just some little decoration that you saw when I showed you the project at the beginning. And for this, I want to use this image here from unsplash.com, which has 3 images available. First of all, we need a folder where we put this. So we go back into our project, we create a new folder at the root, call it assets. And in here we can create another folder called images. Then I want to open this folder on my PC, so we can right click it and click on Reveal in File Explorer. Then we open this folder, and in here I simply want to download this image tool. So download 3, medium size should be enough. We copy this folder name, paste it in here. And here we want to save this image, and I'm going to change the name just to make it a bit easier to use it later in our code. I'm going to call it main_image.jpg. Alright, we save this in here, we can close this. And now we can use this image on our website. Of course, you should make sure that you have usage rights for this image, but images on Unsplash are free to use. And then we want to put this image in here. And usually in HTML, you have this lowercase img tag that you can use. But in Next.js apps, we should use this image component, which is written with an uppercase I. And it should import this import statement here, next/image, not the Bootstrap one. Because these Next.js images are optimized. For example, Next.js will automatically resize them to the proper size and more stuff like that, which is really cool. But you only get this when you use Next.js's own image component. Styling of the image can be a bit awkward, so we have to wrap this into another div. On this other div, we can then apply some styling so that it resizes properly. There's a full documentation about Next.js images with all the styling and all the options available, but for now you don't have to know any of this stuff. To this outer div, we add a class name, and again I explain all of this in my Learn Beginner course, how this works with class name and CSS modules. Here I will skip these explanations. And for the value we pass styles, which refers to our home module.css, and we call the class main_image_container. We haven't set up this class yet, but we will do this later. For now, let's complete this image here. First of all, we have to set the image source, which we want to point to the image in our assets folder. So, by the way, we can remove this inter import. We don't need this anymore, but we want to import our image. So let's write import. Let's call it main image from, and the route looks like this: add, which is a root folder, /assets/images/ and then the image name of the file name, so main_image.jpg. Okay, and then we can use this here. But we are not done yet, we have to give this image a size. So we can either hard code this, but since we want to have this image responsive, we set the size to fill, just with this fill prop here. This means that it will fill the main image container with its size, and the main image container is later responsible for resizing on different screen sizes and so on. Again, this is explained in more detail in the documentation, and I will also probably explain this more in depth in my Next.js course. Then an image needs an alt attribute, which is an accessibility feature for people who can't see the image. For example, people who are blind, and the alt is a text that describes the image, and you should always add this so that everyone can use your website. So we want to explain the image that we just downloaded, and when we save this, we can see it here. Now it fills the whole site at the moment, but we will fix this in a moment. Let's describe this: a picture of a woman holding both her hands in front of her face. I think this should be descriptive enough. Let's type this in. Then we also set a priority attribute, which does some optimization on the image. I think it preloads it before the link to the page is actually open, something along those lines. It takes care of optimizations, and you should use this on the largest image above the fold on the website. So later on our website, this image will be visible right away. It's a large image. This is why we should use this priority tag. Again, this is explained in the documentation in more detail. And we will also need some styling on the image component itself. So we add another class here, styles.mainImage. Again, we haven't created this class in our home module CSS yet, but we will do this later. Or let's actually do it right now, because otherwise our page will keep looking like this and it's difficult to style the rest of the page. So let's go into the home module.css. First of all, we set the main class, which is the class of this outer div here that we didn't delete earlier. And we add some attributes. Display flex, flex direction column, so everything is below each other. Align item center. Right now we can't see any changes yet because our image here hides everything. But let's add the remaining attributes. We set the max width to 600 pixels, so this is the max width of the whole page. Of course, you can change this later however you want. We set the margin to auto, which centers the content in the middle of the screen. We add some, not pad, but padding here. Padding at the top and at the sides of the page. 4 rem for top and bottom, and 1 rem for horizontal spacing. And text align center is also necessary to put some stuff in the middle of the page. Okay, now let's fix our image here. Main image container was the class we gave our image wrapper here. We have to set the position to relative. This is necessary in order for this fill attribute here to work properly. And this is explained, you guessed it, in the documentation. Alright, we set the width of this to 100%, so it fills this whole 600 pixels, but our image still isn't there yet. Why? Because it has a width, but it doesn't have a height yet. We want to make the height dependent on the width instead of setting this to a fixed height. And we can do this with the aspect ratio attribute. Gonna set this to a 12:7, which makes sure that this image always has this 12:7 ratio on the height. This way we make this responsive. And the text like H1 and H2, they automatically change their size. This is what Bootstrap already takes care of. This is enough responsiveness for us. We also set the margin on the image. 2 rem for top and bottom and 0 for the sides to get a bit space in here. And then some more styling on the main image, which is the class we set on the image component itself. We set object fit to cover, which center crops the image itself to the size of the image, because if we don't add this, the image will be distorted if the aspect ratio isn't perfect with the image size itself. This way it looks better. We give it rounded corners with border radius. Let's set it to 40 pixels. Just looks a bit better. And then I'm gonna copy paste this box shadow, which you can type out by hand. Yeah, it adds this little shadow here at the bottom, which just makes it look cooler. I'm just wondering why the background color is not applied, because we already set this here. I think this will be fixed if we just refresh the page. Yeah, there's the background color. And now it should stay like this. Alright, and there's one more class we put in here, which we set to input form. We haven't used this class yet. We will later use this on the text input field. But this is the last piece of CSS we have to put in here, so I want to do this right away, so we are done with this. We set the width of this to 100% as well, so that it will span the whole available width that it has. And then we can actually close the home module CSS because we are done with this, and the global one as well. And now we add the remaining HTML components in here. We want to insert this little text input field that we need, for which we use Bootstrap's form component. So we do it below this image container wrapper, so below this closing div tag, and add a form in here. And we want to import this React Bootstrap form, which should add this import statement. We want to use this here. We want to set the onSubmit attribute to handle submit. This is a function we haven't created yet. We will do this in a moment. And this takes care of what the code should do when we submit the form. In my Learn beginner course, we used React Form Hook, which is a special package that makes working with forms easier. But since there's only one input field here, we can skip this and just do it manually. But in larger forms, you want to use a package for that, which again we learn in the Learn course or in my upcoming NextJS course. Okay, and then we set a class name on here, which we want to set to this styles input form class we just created a moment ago. Then we close this form tag and we get this closing tag down here. Now when we save this, we get an error because we haven't created this function yet. Let's do it above, but let's keep it empty for now. So for now, we just create an async function, which we call handle submit. It will also take an argument, which we call e. You can also call it event. And it's of type form event. Then we make an angle bracket. The type of this form event is HTML form element, like this. Now it doesn't import form event automatically, so we have to do this manually. Import curly braces form event from React. This is where this is coming from. Alright, and we will fill out the content of this function later. We just add an empty one right now so that our code compiles and we can see our preview. Okay, and then we want our one input field down here, which we do with a component from Bootstrap. Form.group. We add a class name. We use this mb-3 class name, which is a utility class from Bootstrap. This adds some margin to the bottom of the input field. We set a control ID to prompt input. I explained the control ID in my Learn course. It's not so important right now what this does. We want a label, so we type in form.label, which is the little text that will be shown above the form, or above this input field rather. And I'm going to type in create a cringy quote about ... This form label is what you can also use, for example, on a sign-up form that says username or password, just so that people know what this input field is about. So it just looks like this at the moment, normal text. And below we put the input field itself with form control, which gets a self-closing tag with a slash and a closing angle bracket like this, because all the attributes go right inside this tag. It needs a name, so we can get the value from it later. Gonna set this to prompt. You can give it any name you want. We can set a placeholder, which is the little text that will be shown in the input field as long as we haven't inserted anything yet. Gonna set this to a description of what we can type in there. So e.g. success, fear, potatoes. This is just a hint on what people can type in there. We can also set a max length so that people can't insert like 1,000 characters. Let's set this to 100. You can also set this lower. I think that's reasonable. Alright, that's our input field here. And then we also need a button to confirm this input and submit our form. We can also do this by pressing enter, but having a button, of course, is important as well. So we go below the form group, but still inside the form tag here. We add an opening angle bracket button from React Bootstrap. So this one here. We close this. We can put the text of the button in here, make me Grinch, for example. But we have to add some attributes on the opening tag of the button. We have to set the type to submit. This automatically connects this button to this form because it's inside the same form tag. So HTML knows that this is supposed to be the submit button for this form. So when we press this button, it will execute on submit, which will execute our handle submit function. This way we don't have to set an on-click listener on this button manually. We add the same mb3 class name here as well to have some padding below. We could also use our own CSS classes for that, but these utility classes of Bootstrap are really useful. Alright, and then we need some state for our component here. State is how you can change data that is shown on your page in React. Again, this is all explained in my Learn beginner course. So we create a const, call the first one quote, and the setter we call setQuote. This will later contain the response we get from the server, the motivational quote. We want to use the useState hook, which again, for some reason, it doesn't import automatically. We put it here behind form event because it's a React import. We set the default value to an empty string, because before we do our request, of course, we don't have any quotes yet. So we set this to an empty string. The next state is an indicator for when the quote is currently loading, so we can show our progress bar. We call the state quote loading, and the setter is set quote loading. And we initialize this with a use state of false, which automatically makes this a boolean because TypeScript can infer the type from this value. And the last one, which is called quote loading error, and that quote loading error, I think this is self-explaining, which we initialize with use state of false as well. So add all of this stuff. And before we write all the code that fetches the quote from the backend and sets the loading state and so on, first of all, let's finish this down here to make sure that we actually display the quote after we got it back later. We want to show the quote we get back from the server below the form. So we go below the form closing tag, but inside the main tag still. Here we write curly braces, quote loading, 2 ampersand signs, to render this component that comes on the right side only if quote loading is true. In this case, we want to show a spinner. Again, this is a bootstrap import. This is this loading spinner. We set animation to border, which is the styling of how the spinner will look. And we close this with a slash and a closing angle bracket. We can actually try it out. We can set quote loading to true for a moment, and we can see the spinner here. But we set this back to false because we only want to show this while we are loading the response from the server. Alright, if quote loading error is true, then we want to show a text that says something went wrong, please try again. We can try this out as well. Set this to true for a moment. There's our error text. Set this back to false. And there's only one missing, the quote itself. So if the quote has a value, and you might think, wait, quote is a string and not a boolean, how can we use it in this condition here? But this just checks if this value is true here, which is a JavaScript concept. Certain values that are not booleans still have a true or false value. For example, an empty string is false here. It's the same as using a boolean or false. If there was text in there, it would be true here. So by typing it like this, it will only show this piece of UI down here if the string is not empty. And in this case, we want to show the quote itself. Let's wrap this into H5 text just so the text is a bit bigger. And in here, we want to insert the quote itself. It's a variable, so we use these curly braces. Otherwise, it would just write quote, literally the word. But we want the value of the variable. Okay, but this will only be shown after we've got a quote back from the server. One more thing I want to do down here, I want to add another attribute to the submit button, this disabled attribute. And we pass quote loading here as well. So when we make a request to the server and the quote is loading, we want to disable the button so that the user doesn't accidentally press it like 3 times in a row, right? So it will be disabled as long as the current quote is loading. Alright, let's save this again. And before we take care of this function here, we first want to create our server endpoint, right? Because where are we going to send this request to? So let's go into our sidebar here once again. And we already have this example endpoint here. We can just open this one and reuse it. We want to rename this. And the name of this defines the name of the endpoint in the URL as well. For example, to reach this endpoint right now, we would type in our address /API/hello. So this is the API folder. This is the name of this endpoint. We want to rename this because we don't want to have it called hello, right? I'm going to rename this to cringe, but you can give it any name you want. And now I can access the same endpoint when I go to /cringe. And the other one from before should not work anymore, right? Because we renamed it. Okay, so this is our API endpoint now. And normally you would have to set up a whole server, right? Like an Express server. But with these API endpoints, we can create servers directly in NextJS. Again, there are different situations where you still want to use something like an Express server. It depends on exactly what you need. There are benefits and downsides to both. But for our project here, this is absolutely enough. because all we want to do are some API requests to OpenAI's API. Okay, so let's write some code. First of all, we can get rid of this data type here and remove it from here as well, because we don't need this. What we need is OpenAI, right? The package we installed. And OpenAI requires a configuration. So let's start with that. We create a const configuration and we put it outside of this handler function here, right above it. Equals new configuration, and we want to import this OpenAI class here. It should add this import statement. Parentheses, curly braces, and in here we want to enter the API key, which we stored in our env.local file. So we use the same name. And we can access our environment variables with process.env. and the name of the variable. And I like to add these trailing commas. You don't have to, because this is the only value we put in here. Semicolons are optional as well in JavaScript, by the way. Okay, and then we need an instance of OpenAI. So we create a const OpenAI and initialize a new OpenAI API, which adds another import statements here. However, I'm not sure if this import statement here is correct from this dist folder. I think it should be in here. So let's put it in here and import it from OpenAI, like this. And to the OpenAI API constructor, we pass the configuration we created up here. Okay, this initializes this. That's all for the OpenAI setup. Now we want to take care of this endpoint handler. This is the code that actually executes when we access this /API/cringe endpoint. At the moment, we just send this hard-coded response of John Doe. Of course, we don't want to keep it like this. So let's remove this. What we want to do is we want to extract the prompt that we send to the backend, whatever we type in here. We can send this over a JSON body, but we can also just send it directly in the URL as a query parameter, which would look like this. We make a request to our server address /API/cringe, and then we have a question mark and would send the prompt like this. Prompt equals potato. This is just usual HTTP URL stuff. These query params are one way of sending data to a server, and it's the easiest way for our case here, because we don't have to set up anything special. We can just extract the prompt into a variable from rec, which is this request object, .query, which gives us all the query parameters that we type in the URL, and then the name, which is this part here after the question mark and before the equal sign, prompt. This is how we will send it to the server. And then we just save this in here as a string. We can also do some simple verification here. We can check if the prompt is missing. So again, if the prompt is false here, then we want to send an error back to the front end, because then we can't continue with this request, right? So we do return res.status for 100, which is the error code that we sent back, .json, which is the JSON body that we sent back, and in here we put error, prompt missing. So if someone makes a request without a prompt to this endpoint, we send this JSON response back and this error status code. And we add another one. Remember, we added this max length of 100 characters in here, but this is only enforced in our front-end code. Someone could still circumvent this, for example, by sending a request with Postman or some other tool to our backend. So we always have to check this on the server as well. Otherwise, we can't guarantee that people actually adhere to this. So we want to check if prompt.length is over 100 characters. Then we want to send back an error as well, like we did up here, which will say prompt too long. All right. But if none of these errors hit, if the prompt is there and the length is short enough, then we want to use OpenAI to generate a response, right? And this is called a completion. If you look into the documentation of OpenAI, it can do different things. It can, for example, embed text inside other text, but the most common usage that you want to use is text completion. So you give it a prompt and then you say, please complete this prompt using your AI. So this is what we want to do. We want to create such a completion, which looks like this. We create a variable for it. Let's call it completion. And then we call await because it's an asynchronous request. We have to await it. We take OpenAI and call create completion on this library. And then between parentheses and curly braces, we have to do some configuration. First of all, we need to define the model. This is what we also did in the playground earlier. Remember, the model we want to use is DaVinci. So we type in the name, text DaVinci 003, exactly like this. If you want to use a different model, you can read about them in the documentation. Now this await complains because we are inside a non-async function. So here, before function handler, we add this async keyword. And now we can call await in here. All right, and some more configuration. The next value we have to pass is the prompt. And this is the text we give GPT-3 to complete for us. And here you can really get creative. You can tell it, okay, tell me a joke about this topic. But you can also be much more elaborate and give it more instructions. And whatever you type in here will be taken into consideration. So we can tell GPT-3 how to behave, so to speak. So let's enter a string here, but I'm gonna use these backticks this time because this allows us to put a variable into the string and put a string beyond multiple lines also. So here I give GPT-3 instructions. Create a cringy motivational quote based on the following topic. Period. Then I insert a \n for a line break because I want to continue in the next line. We could also just use a space here, but I think it makes sense to format this text properly when we send it to GPT-3 instead of having everything in one line. I don't know if it actually changes anything about the response, but better to be safe here. In the next line I write topic : because we just told GPT-3 create a cringy motivational quote based on the following topic, and by topic : we can let it know, okay, this is the topic we want to get the quote for. And here we put our prompt that we send to the server. So we put this variable in here with a $, 2 curly braces, and the name of the variable prompt. Another \n because now I want to say cringy motivational quote : and after this text ends, GPT-3 will go ahead and complete this text. So by adding this label cringy motivational quote, let's fix this like this, we make it very clear to GPT-3 what it's supposed to put in here. If we remove this, it would still work in most cases, but it could also be that it tries to complete our own topic, for example. But we don't want this. We want to be very clear here and say, okay, this is the topic and this is where you put the quote. And then we let GPT-3 complete this. And if you don't like the output, you can fine-tune the prompt by changing this text here. So remember, this text is the description we give GPT-3. Just pretend that GPT-3 is a real person that understands these instructions. You can write them in normal human language. So you can really play around with this and try different combinations. Just keep in mind that the longer the final text is, the more quota it will use up. So if you later decide to actually create a paid account, then a longer prompt and a longer result will also cost more. And the prompt here counts towards this length. So it makes sense to not make this too long. We can also use another attribute called max tokens to limit how long the final text can be at most. In the documentation, it's explained what the token is. I think it's a piece of a word, I'm not quite sure, but 500 is a value that should be fine, so it can't get huge. And then we want to do some more fine tuning in here. We want to send the temperature, which we saw in the playground earlier, if you remember. This is the creativity of the text it creates. If we set this to 1, it's very creative, which I think makes sense for our use case. If you want to create something like a chatbot that answers questions for you that are really based on very specific information, then you want to set this to a lower value or maybe even to 0, because there's not much creativity involved when there are clear answers, right? So it depends on what you want to do. Then we set presence penalty to 0. And we set frequency penalty to 0 as well, which basically means that GPT-3 is allowed to repeat itself or repeat words within the text. All right, and we are almost done. So this executes this completion. Now we just want to get our text out of this completion and send it back to the front end so we can show it here on the screen, on the page. So we create a const quote because this is the final quote that we get. equals completion dot data dot choices, and here we want to pick the first choice, so we are using array access operator and type in 0, the first index, and then we use this text property here, and this contains our completion. Now if you want, you can also try logging this completion here, so you can see all the information that's contained in there. There is some meta information about the request and the response in there, but the final completion is contained inside completion data choices text. Again, you can see the full structure of this response in the documentation. I just don't want to make this tutorial too lengthy. And then we send this code back to the front end. So we say rest.status 200, which means the request was successful. And we send the body back in form of a JSON, which contains the quote itself. So we write quote colon quote. I think we can actually just pass quote like this. If the name of the JSON key and the name of the variable are the same, then this is the short form for it. And then our server is actually ready. So we can save this with Ctrl S. And then all that's left to do is to send the prompt on our front end to this API endpoint and then display the response on the page. So let's go into the index.tsx file again and finish the handle submit function. First of all, we call e.preventDefault. This is necessary because by default, when we submit a form, it refreshes the page. We want to get rid of this, so we call this because we want to decide ourselves what we do with the input of this form, because we want to send this to our backend. Now, since we are not using a library like React hook form, we have to do a little bit of code to get our value actually out of the form. So we create a const form data, which we initialize with new form data. And in here we pass e.target. E is the form event we pass to this function, and target is the form input itself. But we also have to cast this to HTML form element with this as keyword, because otherwise TypeScript doesn't know what type this field is of. This allows us to get our value out of there. So we create a const prompt form data.get, and here as a string we pass the name of this input field, which is the name we pass down here, prompt. We put it into the string. Then we want to call toString because this returns a form data entry value. We want to get the actual string from it. And it also makes sense to call .trim, which removes any white spaces we put in the front or the back of this word, because those are not letters we want to send to the backend, right? Okay, and we are almost done. First of all, we check if prompt is true here. If it isn't, we don't want to do anything. There's no point in sending a request to the server if the user didn't type in the prompt. We also don't need to show an error message because I think it's clear that we can't send this while it's empty. Inside here we put a try catch block because now we do our API request and an HTTP request can always go wrong, in which case we want to show an error. So what we do here is we log this error to the error console like this, so we can see the error message. But to the user, we will just show our generic something went wrong message here. They don't need to know the specific details. So we set quote loading error to true, which sets the state up here to true, which takes care of showing this error message in the UI by setting the state here to true. In the try block, first of all, we want to set the quote back to an empty string. So if there's already a quote on the screen, but we search for a different one, we will remove it right away. But that's up to your personal taste. We also want to reset the error back to false, so the error message disappears when we make a new request. And we want to set quote loading to true so that we show the progress bar. Then below we make the request to the server. We create a const response, await fetch, then the endpoint where we want to make our request to. We don't have to type in the base URL, we can just type in /API /cringe, which is our endpoint, right? Then a question mark to add this query param to the URL, prompt equals, and then outside of the string, we want to append the prompt that we type into the form field. So after this plus, we type encode URI component. This takes care of encoding any special characters like spaces or I don't know, percentage signs, so that we can actually put them in the URL, because the URL doesn't accept all characters. But by encoding this properly, we can send any character to the backend basically. And here we pass our prompt. So this just builds the backend UI and makes this fetch request. Then we want to get the data out of this response, so we create a const body equals, and the await is important. Otherwise, we will not get the correct result, because passing the JSON body out of the response is an asynchronous request. After await, we call response.json like this, which, as I already explained, gets the JSON body out of the response. And the JSON body contains our quote, which means that below we call zQuote, and we are still in the try block, so there was no error. And then we can get it from body.quote, which is how we send the response from the backend. Okay, cool. Just one more thing, and finally, which will be executed when the try or the catch block has finished in any case, we want to set quote loading back to false so that our loading spinner disappears. And unless I forgot something, we should actually be done. This is a whole little full stack application with a backend which should make a request to OpenAI's GPT-3 API. So now is the big moment. Let's try this out. So our website is running, right? If it isn't, just execute npm run dev again. And let's create a motivational quote about paper. There's the spinner, it makes the request, and there's our response. Though paper may be thin, it is far from weak. Be like paper, always resilient and never give up. Wow, this quote really made my day. And now, as promised, I also want to show you how you can fast and easily deploy this to Vercel. What we have to do is we have to put this into a GitHub repository. So with VS Code, we can execute this publish to GitHub command here. And you can decide if you want to make this private or public. I'm going to make this public so you can take a look at the code later. Alright, so this is creating a new repository. Okay, I also have to push the latest changes. For the commit message, I'm just going to type project finished. It's not an awesome commit message, but for what we are doing here, it's enough. Okay, commit and push, so that we have this code in our repository. So here is the repository. That's also the link where you can find the code, and I will put this link in the video description as well. And the best hosting provider for Next.js apps is Vercel. Why? Because Vercel is the company that also created Next.js. So all the infrastructure is optimized for Next.js projects. And all these features like image optimizations or these API routes for the backend, they all work automatically when you deploy your Next.js project to Vercel. If you use any other hosting provider, then you have to do some special setup. But if you want to use Vercel, you just have to create an account, set up a team. I've already done this, just follow the instructions. And then you will have your overview in this team. And then we click here on add new and a new project. And this Vercel account is connected to my GitHub account. You have to connect it to your GitHub account so that it has access to your repositories. Because this way, whenever you push changes to your main branch of your repository, Vercel will automatically deploy the changes to the production URL. This is really cool. This is something you usually have to set up manually, but here this all works out of the box. So here we can see my repositories of my Coding and Flow account, or at least the last 5 of them. I'm gonna import the one we just created. So then we have to give this project a name. Don't have to change anything here, but we have to set the environment variables. Remember, we don't push the environment variables to GitHub. So we have to set it there as well. So we copy this part, and we need a name as well. I can remember this. OpenAI API key like this, and we pass the value here, so that we have the environment variable available in our deployed code as well. Alright, and then we click on deploy, and Vercel takes care of all of the rest. So this will take a moment, like a minute or so, or half a minute. Okay, and we got an error here, but this is not Vercel's fault. This is something wrong in our code. I think I know what the reason is. I think these import statements here for the bootstrap button and spinner are wrong. I think they should be imported like this. So we cut this out, paste it here after form, and spinner as well. Remove this, save it. Yeah, remove this line here as well. Save everything, push the changes. Let's say bootstrap import fix. Let's push this to the repository. So when we go back to our project overview, you can see that the change I pushed to main is automatically recognized by Vercel, and it actually should deploy these changes. Yeah, as we can see, it automatically went ahead and deployed these changes. And this time everything worked. So I guess even though this error was unintentional, it's a nice way to show how changes are deployed automatically after we push them to the repository. Okay, and Vercel actually automatically gives us these domains here for every deployment, which we can actually use to reach our website now. Of course, this is not a beautiful domain, but you can actually buy and set up domains directly here in Vercel as well. So there's everything under one roof, which is really nice. So when we click on our account up here, we can go to domains, and here you can buy a new domain. Type it in here and the setup, everything is explained to you. It will be really easy. You don't need me to show you this. But under this testing URL, we can already reach our website and everything should work here as well. So let's get a cringy quote about water. And it's making our request to OpenAI and it's still working. Really cool. Congratulations, you now have your very own GPT-3 AI website. And of course, you can play around with the prompts and read the documentation of OpenAI and maybe come up with some cool project. And if you have built something cool with it, leave a comment below. Let me know about it. I'm gonna read it. And remember that I'm building a full NextJS course with many more features that we used here. Again, you can sign up for the email list under codingandflow.com/nextjs. And as soon as the course is ready, you will find the course at the same URL. So take a look at it. The link will be in the video description below. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave a like under this video and subscribe to the channel for more tutorials like this in the future. Happy coding. Have a nice day. Take care.